Well, this is the Cape LaHave. It's a scallop dragger, and it's heading out to the Outer Banks to actually fish. Usually they go out for 3 to 5 days, and it's bringing back lots of scallops. Not so good for the ocean floor, but the scallops taste really good because they're so fresh. So that means there's no storms coming for the next 4 days, 5 days probably, because they don't go out if there's a big storm coming. Okay, a few people have asked me to show how I grind pieces, and it is in a previous video, but it takes me forever to remember where I put something in a video, so I thought I'd quickly add this into another video. I have stopped doing this now, but occasionally one dribbles down the handle and it builds up glaze because of the handle and the mug, and it always drips down just in that one spot. However, I fixed it because now my profile, I've increased a ramp hold, I've increased a segment in it, and so basically I rapid cool from peak temperature 22, 23 to 32. It was where I go to 22, 32 or 22, 23, and then I rapid cool to by 400 degrees an hour down to 2000. So I only hold for 15 minutes and cool fast by 400 degrees to 2000, let the kiln cool naturally. And then I slowed the cool down to 150 degrees an hour from 2000 to 1750, and then do another hold for an hour. That's how I get all the crystals developing in the glazes. But anyway, so this doesn't happen anymore. But I've had these hanging around for a long time, so I figured I'd show you how to grind them. I'm going to fire them upside down on some of them as well, but you should buy yourself a bench grinder rather than using a drill. You can use one of these, it'll take you forever and all that. So it's better to spend $100 and get a bench grinder and all that. Here you go. COVID's done something, at least. You can buy masks cheap now. So basically, you can get it back to flat. And sometimes if you press too hard, it will chip a little bit. So you got to be careful not to press too hard because it gets over hot. So just keep lifting it off a little bit, which is what I was doing, and it doesn't chip. But you can grind and save a $30 mug down, you know, and it takes about a minute to a minute and a half generally to grind one. So it's your best hourly rate ever. So, but anyway, it saves the mugs. So grinding. Okay, we're going to do a video on making some ceramic frames, and this is the time of year when I usually make them in the spring, and that's because I used to fire them in my gas kiln. That's the only place that I could actually get them to work, but recently I figured out I can fire them in the electric kiln, and I'll talk about that later in the video. But anyway, it's possible now to do them in an electric kiln. Hooray! It's also that time of year when I do a lot of gardening in my studio, so I have a whole bunch of seedlings growing over there. I've got grow lights and stuff. I actually love gardening, so basically I've got flower beds all over the place, and you'll see that later in the season when I do my videos, or go back and look at May, June last year. I've got lots of videos from that period with garden shots. But anyway, I am going to use number 80 from Laguna. Let's put this down so you can see what I'm going to do. Number 80 from Laguna is a clay that has a slight speckle, and it's an iron clay, so it comes out very dark brown in the firing. But I've noticed that it has a less of a shrinkage rate than the other clays, and it seems to survive the firings a lot better. So what I do is I have a piece of paper here too. This table I use for all sorts of stuff, but I'm not going to use the whole block at the moment because I don't need a huge number of frames, but I will be making a lot of frames in the next week. But just today I'm going to do a quick demo for you. This is my hop from England. People have actually asked me about this, and this is what it looks like. It's got a guitar string across it, and these are available in England. I don't know if they're available here. My guess is that somebody makes one in the United States. Probably, I think I've seen one even attached to a pug mill that just comes down like on an arm. But this one, they sell them in different sizes, and this is my 18-inch one. It's either 16 or 18 inches. It's probably 16 is my guess, but anyway, I always think these are great, so if you haven't got one, get yourself one. So it means you can cut through things just holding with one hand. So anyway, I'm going to make a fairly large ceramic frame here, and I can cut straight down the block like that. Pull this back a bit so you can see. Or I could deliberately get a bit of a wedge going here, because it's easier if the slab roller goes up a little bit of a wedge shape, and then cut down. And as you can see, it's pretty thick on that side and not so thick on this side. So I got a little bit of a wedge going there. I have a Bailey slab roller upstairs as well, and I've got this one that I use. I used to have a Brentwood slab roller, and I think it was called an S something C, but I sold that to, after it was like 35 years old, I sold it to another person, and it still works. So this is an important thing to note. When rolling a slab, I've noticed that it always rolls into an oval. And so what I do is bang it down and leave a lump just here at the outer edge. And then I make a little bit of a, I should have cleaned this plastic, there's a little dry clay left on it. And then using a rolling pin, I kind of level it out a little bit. Used to roll slabs with this all on their own with 2 sticks either side. That worked fine too. If you haven't got a slab roller, you just get 2¼ inch sticks about 20 inches long each, put one either side, and then when you roll the rolling pin along, it will get your slab the thickness of those sticks. I used to teach that at high school. I used to teach high school in Kent, in England. Okay, so that slab's pretty good. I'm just going to get the dry clay off here a bit. Because a little dry clay, I've noticed, just gets into the, there you go, that should work, into the softer clay and doesn't make a difference. But if you've got big pieces, it would probably make lumps in your clay. Now, it's thicker at the edge here, and it's thicker at the edge here, and then in the center it's a little thinner. So we should end up with a square. And I can take it to the edge of the table like this and just bang it and square up the edge like that. And then the same over here, and bang it again, square up the edge again, and it thickens the 2 edges a little bit, and I like to look at them and see whether I do have it fairly even. And of course the test is in the actual rolling. So you place it up to the slab roller blanket, pull the blanket across. So it's basically on canvas, on plastic, then the clay, and then the canvas blanket over the top. And different slab rollers will have different instructions, but I've always found this works really well. And then, let's move you back a bit. Then I push the clay against the roller and just start rolling. And I've got the slab roller set for just under 1/4 inch, because I like these to be fairly thin. Actually, this one's reading 1/4. Let's go back and say this one's reading just under 1/4. So just under 1/4, and this one can be tightened up a touch. So that should make it pretty even. So we've got a tiny bit under 1/4 inch. We're talking less than 1 millimeter. But anyway, keep rolling. and then I always roll back. I don't know why, but I think that evens up the stress in the clay a little bit, and I always gain a little extra width on that side there. Okay, so we could have thickened it up a little bit more here and a little bit more there, and then we would have ended up with this much more even. But the only bit of wasted clay here is this little bit there. So it's the tiny little bit. So we got a pretty good square out of that. I'm going to take this piece of paper, put it on top of my wooden board. Actually, this is a good thing to point out at this point. This isn't wood. This is concrete board. It's very thin, 1/2 inch, and I put masking duct tape all the way around it. And I cut these because they never warp. These are flat for a decade now. I've had these 10, 11 years, and they've stayed flat, being used constantly. So concrete board for foundations in a construction yard, I would think you get it at any hardware store. But anyway, that's a great kind of board to have in a pottery studio. But the edges do flake, and it's reinforced with nylon, I think, so it is really strong. But cover the edges because you don't want bits of concrete coming off into your clay. All right. Now, when you lift the clay, obviously it's stuck to the plastic. So I know this looks scary because you've got a thin piece of clay hanging in there, but it actually won't come off. And then you lay it down on top of the paper as carefully as you can, so you can maximize how much you're going to use of this clay slab. And I think I can go over just a touch this way. So you can see there, I'm trying to get it as much on the paper as I could there. And then you peel the plastic back. Don't lift it like that, it will pull the clay up. So pulling it back like this, and it'll peel right off, leaving it flat. Then it's on paper now. You want to smooth this over. Just a little thin metal rib. Okay, now this is from an electrical lighting shop. I got it years ago, and I'm not sure. It's just a thin piece of plastic. Don't you love that? There you go. And I put measurements in inches all the way around two sides, so that I can measure my frames. But the one thing you should do is place a piece of paper in the center. Okay, never let a good telephone book go to waste. So this is this telephone book paper, and the sheets are perfect for a lot of stuff I do in the studio, including stopping that sticking to this. So I place this in the center, and you can actually put two of them down if it's not big enough. And it just means this little, that's really sticky clay, and this is basically just going to stick to it if we're not careful. So I place this on top and try and maximize how much I can use out of this piece of clay. I only want to cut what's on paper underneath too. That looks pretty good. I can probably go a little further over, and I'm going to get this, the edges of this side maxed out on there, and I can go a little bit further on that side. So I cut it, not touching the plastic where the actual, there's no paper separating it. Keep your clay soft, so throw it back in the bag as you're cutting it off. Okay, so I've got my little edges trimmed. So this is 13.5 inches deep there, and it's 13.5 inches there, but I've got about another inch that I can use. So I will lift this now let's just see if I can, yeah, I think I can just lift it that way. And just, I can use a ruler for this part. Let's just go with a ruler. I'm just going to take that line and draw it across. Okay, so we've gained a little extra. Actually, I gained probably, let's see how much I gained here. Yeah, I did gain about an inch. I thought I could. So that means one side will be a little longer than the other. And if I'm lucky, I could just put that there and draw along. And I barely wasted any clay. Just a few little odd bits off the side. Did I get? Ah, no, I got a little triangle cut off the edge there. So I'm just going to cut this back. I thought I'd only gained just about an inch. But that's, you know, what is that, ½ centimeter? Okay, so we've got paper underneath. Now I can just lift that. It didn't stick to that at all. And I can take this off. And there's my clay slab ready to cut the frame in. Okay, this is the tile that I want to frame in here. So I really don't, I mean, the shrinkage is really tricky because this is already made. So I'm going to make sure I got lots of space around it when I cut this out, that it will actually then fit after the firing. So when I measure these, so I've got to make this, it's got to finish at 7 1/4 by 9 inches. So what I'm going to assume is the shrinkage rate is a lot more than it is, but I'm going to say 9 inches should be at least 10 1/2, and that way it'll definitely fit. And 7 1/2 is going to be 9 3/4. So 9 3/4 by 10 1/2. 9 3/4 by 10 1/2. So let's put this back in the middle. Maybe I should shrink that down just a touch. And then pull this out. Now don't cut with this, I'm just going to let it make a light line from corner to corner. So no weight, just a light little line, corner to corner. And then I can put this on here, and this is the longer side here. So I want that 10 1/2. So I'm going to look to make a 10 1/2 inch there. So there's 10 1/2. That point is there, so it's a 10 1/2 is on that line. And then 9 and we want 9 3/4. Oh my gosh, this is almost perfect. I didn't even know. Well, anyway, 9 3/4. Look at that. So that's actually perfect. 10 1/2, 9 3/4. So I'm going to go to the corner, and when you get to the corner, you don't want to go past at all, because if you make any cut into the wall of the clay there, it's going to crack in the kiln. So be very careful not to go any further than where you have to go. And then to 9 3/4. And now what I do is take this, turn it around, because these measurements, 9 3/4 there, 10 1/2 here. So this means it's parallel. The lines are all parallel. Now the paper's sticking under a tiny little bit there, so I've got to be careful. That's fine, it pushed the paper back underneath a little bit. So 10.5. The paper stops this sticking to it. You could make yourself a wooden one of those if you want to, but wood will actually warp. So I would think you should try and get a piece of that thin craft foam you get at craft stores and measure one of these up, or just find a piece of plastic that's firm, a sheet of some sort. Okay, so now we have a frame and another piece of clay. Well, guess what? That can become a frame too, so it's not wasted. Okay, so this, if I just carefully, I'll put this right over here for you. I've got another board here set up, and that's actually a wooden board made out of particle board because I don't have another concrete board. But slip the corner of this into the clay and just lift. And this part has got to be done very gently without bending the clay too much. You just lift it and quickly put it down onto your other piece of clay, onto the other board. So there you go. So we got a spare frame basically. So this one I can put aside for a second. Same again, lightly score across. The other score lines are just still left in there a little bit. Scored again. It always seems like the center is where it sticks. And then, so this is the center part, and I did lift it up and bend it, but it's flat at the moment, and if I weight this in the kiln, it will stay flat. If somebody was thinking about that, this will stay flat. Okay, so I've got 6 there, and 6.5 there. 6.5 across there, and 6 inches down there. Seems to fit pretty nicely. So then I'm going to cut. Cut, and then turn it around and do the same again. 6 by 6.5. So we got a 6 by 6.5. Now I'm going to quickly, if I can turn this gently, place that down. I think you know where this is going already. This becomes another frame. And it's never ending. So we've got diagonal lines already in there. So this is the longer edge here. So what I'm just guessing at the size of the frame. I'm doing 3. And this one's just about 3.25. Don't put too much weight on if there's no paper underneath, because it will stick to that piece of clay. So we had 3 and 3.25. So 3.5 by 3.25, that's it. 3.5 and then 3.25, that's better. See, it's trying to stick to the clay. All right, I don't know whether I can keep going on this or not. Because it's never ending. I mean, you could make a tile out of that piece if you wanted to. But, I mean, heck, you know, I've seen some incredible miniatures in museums, so there's nothing to stop you making a tile. This is actually just 1.5 inches square, or just about, which is getting a bit sticky on there. See how it's sticking to there already, so I've got to be careful. And it lifted out the square all on its own. Can I bear to waste this piece of clay? Is it wasted? It'll get recycled. There you go. Out of one slab roll, I got a big frame, a middle frame, and 2 smaller frames. And the 3 smaller ones, I don't have a tile to go in them, but you know, it's worth making these ahead of time, because I could always make a tile small enough to fit in them later. But and now we're going to do some texturing. What do we have in textures? You can do anything you want. There's my little library of clay stamps, so I could use those. If you go to Bailey's, or anywhere else, I guess, Bailey Pottery in the States and Pottery Supply House here in Canada, you can buy these things. And these are rollers that create texture straight away, instant. But this is what everybody does, so because everybody's got these texture stamps, so what your work would be is the same as everybody else's if you do this. I also went to Michael's Crafts and bought one of these. I have never used it. And this was, I thought, wow, this is kind of nice. You've got all these different sort of textures on there. So this is another thing you could use, but once again, I bet there's 1,000 of these around North America, so there's a lot of people could be using these. They're meant for ink pads, so if you want your work to be different, then basically you shouldn't use something like this. You should make your own clay stamps, but this is quick, obviously. You know, if you're a busy potter and you want something really detailed, then you can use this. And I've never used it in all the time I've had it, so I'm going to try it. And this will stick to the clay. You press it once, you might be lucky to get it off, but it might come off, but the second time it will be stuck. So if you're going to do things like this, you have to spray them with PAM or some oily substance so that you can get it off. And then when you fire the kiln, you're going to have to run out and get French fries, because it will really smell like French fries in the kiln room. But anyway, so I've got my PAM. So I spray it down and then just press it. I think I'll do the corners. And it leaves my leaves. Maybe I'll be lucky and I can use it multiple times. Yep. Still works. And it's released again. So we could use this and something else down the side. I mean, this is a nice element just for the corners. But let's think what else we can do. I think what I'll try is this one and see what it looks like. No oil on this though, it's just natural clay. Oh, that's not a good idea, is it? It buckled the clay. So it actually pushes the clay and makes it longer. That's the problem with a roller. So I'm going to hold the clay down. So if you hold the clay down in front, it seems to work better. You still see? Here we go. So it works to use the roller, but you got to put your fingers ahead of the roller so it doesn't actually stretch the clay out too much. And so you're putting compression back on towards the roller, and it worked. So I think we've got some nice interesting texture around that. So there's the frame. All you have to do at this point is lightly soften the edge. You can use your finger if you wanted to, just to rub down there, or your thumb, just to soften any nasty burr or sharp edge that you might have there. Also on the inside. You could use a sponge if you want to, or a paintbrush would even do it. I wouldn't wait till it's dry because it would actually be too dusty and bad for your health. But there's the frame, so of course I have to do the rest of them as well. Now this has to dry, and before the paper wrinkles up, I'm going to put some little weights. Like I have these, I've got lots, and even kiln props that hold the shelves up. We're going to put those on it. Okay, these are kiln props. I think I got these, I bought these with an old kiln, and they were useful. They're terrible for holding shelves up because they're so narrow. But what I do with them is I lay them on the tile piece. And you can make some little weights. One down there. There you go. That's how I dry them. I mean, basically the paper is going to buckle a little bit, but this will hold it flat for the next 24 hours, maybe 12 hours in my damp cupboard. And then before it gets too firm, I will flip it over and I'll show you that next. So you have to remove these because they've been sitting there all night. Get rid of the artwork. And then all I do is place another board over the top, just temporarily. Flipped it over. Take the paper off. At this point, we're using a damp sponge, just wipe around the edge a touch, just to make sure there's nothing left as far as any sharp edges. Do the bottom middle one as well, or the inner one I should say. And then putting this back on. And then flipping it. So you gotta have a bit of courage to do that. You gotta do it fast. There we go. So, and then just put the weights back on. I don't know if you don't have this type of weight, you'll have to figure something out, but these are perfect. They just lightly sit on the texture without really harming it. And they allow it to dry fairly naturally. And now it sits here for about 2 to 3 days, and it will be dry, and then you can fire it in the kiln. And I'll talk about the firing schedule. The frames that I showed you how to make earlier take a long time to dry flat, and you have to put weights on them like I showed you in the video. And when you fire them with weights on as well, because the corners will lift up if you don't, and therefore the bisque firing is the thing where you have to be really, it's important to make sure that stays flat. So put little weights on your corners of all the frames, and you fire at a very slow schedule, and I can give you that profile, but it's really slow, a very slow increase. It's about an 18-hour firing. That way they don't crack. And I never had luck firing these on the thick shelves, the old corduroy shelves. But when I bought the Advancer shelves, I'm having pretty good luck that they don't crack. I mean, I just fired 32 frames, and I got a pile here to glaze as well. So I fired 32 of these, and not one has cracked. So it's a pretty decent firing. And I used to only be able to do these in the gas kiln, but now the electric kiln with the new Advancer shelves seems like these work. So I'm going to glaze one just to show you how I glaze them, because that used to be a real pain as well, but I've got a new way of doing it. This is just a small one of the frames. I can make up to 18-inch square frames, and nothing bigger than that, because they don't fit on the shelves. But anyway, so I just mix my glaze, whatever I'm doing, and then I take a sponge and I just dab it. I don't want it to be too flat and even, so basically I'm dabbing in a circle kind of motion, so that it will actually look random. And then where I've got glaze that has to go into a crevice, I'll just dab a little heavier. Try not to miss any little areas. Because you're dabbing, you can go back over. The idea is to make it look kind of natural. I used to brush glaze these, but the glaze would go over the edges, and cleaning the edges up was a pain in the neck, because this is less than a 1/4 inch tile, and so the glaze would often run, especially if you were starting to do multiple glazing to get nice colors. The glaze would run over the edge and stick the frame to the shelf. And so it's very important that you dab with some firmness, but not enough to squeeze the glaze out of the sponge down the side of the tile. And I usually go around twice just to make sure that I've got it all done. There you go, and that's that one. And then I have a little bit of oatmeal here. Let's make sure this isn't going to overbalance. So dab a little bit. This is the natural oatmeal that I have, and I just do this to kind of create a glow around the edge of the frame. You don't have to do this. It's just I use a lot of barnwood in my big framed pieces, and so this is the mouse grey glaze, and the oatmeal makes it go very matte and kind of lighter, and it matches up with the barnwood that I use. And I love barnwood. Is a little hokey sometimes, but I love it because I love history, and I'm in a historical building, and the building was made of barnwood. So when I took off and resided the building, I kept all the barnwood, and I use it because it's, I think history is really important. And but there you go, that's the frame, and I'll show you what it looks like when it comes out of the kiln. Okay, the frames have to be fired in a very slow profile, about 7, maybe even 8 segments long. So I'll show you that in a minute. But they have to be heated very evenly, but it works really well when you get it right. So here's I call this an antique green. It's just sponged on with a few different greens that we have, just using a regular textured sponge. And so these frames, they stay very flat. That little bit there curled up a little bit there, but generally that's the only one so far that's been curled. They stay totally flat, and of course for a frame that's important, since you're going to have a piece of artwork, although it's a tile in the center there. But these, this is mouse grey and oatmeal on this one. I did all mine mouse grey and oatmeal. I just really like that, and I like to be consistent when my frames are around my artwork. But you can see these stay totally flat, and and this kiln is the same all the way down. Space. If I'd made a bunch of trays, I could have really filled this up with little tiny trays around the frames too. But I wasn't that organized, and I needed these frames out pretty quick. But these pieces tend to be fairly expensive pieces of artwork, ranging in the $100 to $400 range. So to get 32 frames in a kiln, it's economically feasible, I guess. So anyway, here's the next layer down. And you can see all sorts of kind of shapes and sizes, but basically all totally flat. So this I would say is an excellent firing for these. I only do this type of firing maybe once a year, maybe twice at the most. But I 32 frames. It takes a long time to sell 32 flat pieces of artwork, but they all turned out really nice. And a lot of these, as you saw in the video, you can get one frame outside of another, from the inside of another frame, from the inside of another frame. So it's a really, nice way of using clay. I got 32 frames out of one bag of clay, so that's pretty good. This is the next layer down. It's hard to see, but once again, totally flat. That's kind of a narrow one. I don't usually make them as narrow. I like to keep the frame at least 2 inches wider than the piece, so that's kind of a narrow one. Another small one. Another small one. These are like spares from the centers of other ones, but we'll make tiles to fit those later. And another layer. Frames fired within frames. That's a nice way of doing it. Another layer. So we're getting quite a few layers here. And this is the layer right down next to the bottom, so there's one more below this, and that was a really big frame there. Okay, these are all the frames that came out of the kiln that I made for myself. My wife has a whole bunch of others that she made for her as well. So what I'm going to do with all of these next is make a backing board and glue the frame down, glue the tile down onto the backing board and then glue the frame around the tile. So everything worked. We had 100% success rate. And there was one tile at the end there that I forgot to make a frame for. So I've made it already. In fact, that's the one that's in the video. Okay, so next step,